America, the Roosevelts, the Twombly's, the Vanderbilts, the Ballantines, the Frelinheisens. And that was a draw for New Yorkers.
People often think they live in community, but they live in proximity. And I think he's onto something there with respect to Harding.
All the type of noise that cities have, you don't have it out here. You don't have any noise at all at night. It is absolutely quiet.
How could something this beautiful still exist? The local municipality started seeing the streets being widened. We saw intersections. The horse and carriage were being displaced with the automobile. People were moving out of New York at record numbers. You had the Madison Avenue in Madison going into Morristown, having the wealthiest families in America, the Vanderbilts, the Twombly's, the Frelinheisens, the Ballantines, the Rockefellers were building homes there. And you saw something else taking place, subdivisions. So the folks in Harding Township, the farmers who had been farming here for a long time, were not necessarily wealthy. In fact, they were poor, but they recognized what they had in this landmass. And they looked right next door at Morris Township that was doing subdivisions. Going into Morristown, they suddenly saw that houses were being replaced with apartments, that the bigger houses were being torn down at the end of the Gilded Age, which ended in the early 1900s. These houses were being torn down, and the way of life was changing. And it was a few astute farmers and landowners that said, is this what we want for our farms and our homes? And so it took an incredible amount of courage, but it really took a couple of individuals to form something in a sort of a form of a constitution to succeed from Morris Township. And so Harding Township was established. And, if you look back and say, how did it get its name? Well, you had Madison that was once part of Chatham Township. Chatham was named after an English earl. You had Madison that was named after James Madison. So it was only natural that on the way up to Morristown to file the papers with the county clerk, that whoever was driving the car and had the meetings the night before would name this after Warren G. Harding, who was president at the time. I often say when I'm giving talks that we came within a hair's breadth of being known as Coolidge Township because Warren G. Harding died in office soon after the covenant was filed.
And, Harding remains, well, you'll hear this from other people, it's a very special place. It's a very special place in New Jersey, rural as it is, somewhat isolated as it is. The neighborly feel here is not to be replaced anywhere, in my opinion. The quality of life goes without saying. I feel very blessed. My upbringing here was really just amazing. Very fortunate, very privileged. And at the time, I kind of thought, everybody had opportunities like this. I've obviously long since come to realize how very fortunate I was. One of the other great memories is New Year's Day. We would host the hunt on our property called Cressley, now still over on Van Buren Road, and invite the Spring Valley Hounds and the hunt to gather on the property on New Year's Day with brandy and sherry. I can remember handing it up to the ladies and the gentlemen on the high horses, and they would drag the scent at that time of the fox for the dogs to chase. And that was a really great thing. I mean, of course, me being back here was wonderful, but the joy and the morale on a cold, crisp winter day of hosting the hunt at our home was lots of fun.
And we didn't have electricity till the late 30s, early 40s. My mother had just a washing machine where you had to start a motor because we hadn't got electric yet. So we had to kind of help with that, hang the clothes on the line. In the winter they would freeze and they'd be really stiff when you brought them in. And we had to help take care of it. We had a wood and coal furnace, so you had to help keep the fire going. Had one grate in the house. And, you know, we had to help when we had to take care of the animals. And when there was hay time and stuff, we had to help, you know, get the hay in and stuff and water the animals. We had about 50 Black Angus cattle that my father raised for meat and, you know, sell for butchery.
Chickens, turkeys, pigs, cows, and we had horses. When it was time to go to market with those, they were taken to a butcher in Morristown on Pine Street, and they had a cold locker. And they would wrap it all and put our name on it and put it in our locker. We rented a freezer locker. My mother went up every week or two and picked out the meat she wanted for that week in cooking. So that's how we kept our meats all year, and we had all our preserves. We made our own butter, and we had milk and eggs.
We used to raise beer cans in the brooks. One kid down the road had a collection of beer cans, so we'd float them in the brooks and see which beer can would win. You know, we'd have certain beer cans.
During the summer, we met people at our friends at New Vernon Pond, which is now Bain Park, and we swam in the pond and we skated on the pond. We swam in the pond and skated on the pond in the winter. We also swam in the Great Brook, and our family would have picnics there, and once a year we'd have a pig roast with all the families. Our neighbors were like a big family, and we had many picnics.
Back in those days, there were no numbers on the houses. You had to know everybody by name. If you got a first aid call at the Smith residence, you had to know where they lived, because that was it. There was no numbers to go down the road with and try to find a number.
The area was less developed, although I think, you know, it's been very nicely developed and maintained with the zoning and all, but it was primarily large estates. And then you had your working people's homes and your, not that I guess the wealthy didn't work, but it was a different situation. But, and that's been split up over the years, you know, like Kinney's Farm and some of these bigger, you know, the Colgate property, but it was more open, more fields, and it was primarily used for haying, which Mary Ann's, you know, grandfather and father did a lot of those fields, and they did dodges also.
One of the other great memories I have, of course, is in the summertime. I worked on our property on Van Buren Road outside as a kind of like a farmhand, but a maintenance person of the grounds and property. And Ellis Walling, who is also a longtime Harding resident, now deceased. His family, the Morris family, lives on Redgate Road. He would cut and bale our fields. And one of the biggest memories I have from those summers is on a long conveyor belt, the bales of hay would come up into the hay mound on our barn, and we'd unload them with a hook. You know, you put the hook in the bale of hay and you pull it off the conveyor belt, stack it up in the barn. Must have been 95 degrees, consistently up there. And a friend of mine that I did that with called it a back-breaking sweat job. So it was. But it was a great experience for, you know, guys 16, 17 years old in the summertime. And I had that job for quite some time.
We had a coal bin. We were heated by coal, so we had a coal bin in the basement. And the coal truck would come in. We'd run a chute down the cellar steps, and they'd shoot it right into the coal bin. And then we had to put coal in and take it out and take the ashes out every day. We lived on a dirt road. Redgate was a dirt road. This is the house about the turn of the century. I'm not sure of the date on this, but this is the house at 52 Redgate Road.
I grew up on the Frelinghuysen estate on James Street, which at the time was about 300 acres, and it was used primarily to raise the hay for the large cattle population that Mr. Frelinghuysen Sr. had over in, I think it was Whippany Road, and their homestead is now the Morris Museum. That was the Frelinghuysen's home.
My parents met on the train going to college. My father farmed with my grandfather and did all kinds of baling and fence setting and all that as a young man. But his father died when they got married, so they had to move into the homestead and raise their family because they had to run the farm. Now we're down a little bit on acreage because as generations went, it was each child got a portion or a part of the property. So there's different lots were there. My father kept and did as much as he could. He farmed everybody's, and kept as much as he could. So my parents were married, and my grandfather died, so they moved into the house. And there was my sister, Frances Jean, we called her Bobby, and myself. My father taught for 42 years in Summit High School as an industrial arts teacher, and my mother substituted at Harding Township School, and we, but most of it was farm work. Other than school, it was all to do with growing up on the farm.
I responded to an ad to rent a farmhouse on a property in Harding Township. I, along with some other Drew mates, rented it for a few years. I then got married, during which time I got married and moved up to the main house on the property, which had been previously lived in by the Jenks. We rented the backside of the main house. Additionally, the Jenks family owns 1,000 acres with their house, the old Mount Kemble, as well as he and two other friends had bought 2,000 acres that is now been turned over to Jockey Hollow Park. Not only is the Jenks property of historic import, little did I know that previous family that lived in the farmhouse, family by the name of Kunhardt. Philip Kunhardt wrote a book about living in the house, My Father's House. There's also a movie with Robert Preston and Cliff Robertson, My Father's House. Dorothy Kunhardt penned the children's book, Pet the Bunny, on the 3rd floor in our house. Edith Kunhardt came out and visited with me in 2019, and she wrote the book about my mother, the bunny, and me. Maybe the next round of books we can write about the White House. And there's a whole new chapter of living in the White House. And we do have a little book that was done by a friend of mine back several years ago. And what's kind of interesting is the original guys that lived in, we call it the White House. Here's a picture in 1973 of 4 of us. We have a series of 10 of these over the years. Same guys, same order, and the same picture in front of the barn.
When I came here, there was no municipal building. There were no township offices. We all kind of flew by the seat of our pants. The township was run out of a man by the name of William Thompson, who was the township clerk. He had an office in the back of his house, and he had a woman that worked for him by the name of Ethel Furzy. The two of them pretty much ran the whole town. They did all the insurance, they did payroll, they did everything. Not only was he the township clerk, but he was the building inspector too. And in those days, we had no township vehicles. If he went out to do an inspection, he used his car and charted the mileage and was reimbursed for the mileage. It was pretty much true with everything else in town. The health department was run off of a secretary's desk and Joan Gary's dining room. That was the whole health department. She used to ride around in her own personal vehicle, do the septic inspections, do the inspections of the restaurants and the stores. She was a registered nurse, very, very well versed at what she did, and you didn't get anything over on her. No contractors pulled any shenanigans with her. The tax collector was a woman by the name of Florence Young. Second house on the right-hand side, after you get past the Presbyterian Church. You wanted to pay your taxes, you went to see Florence and you paid your taxes.
At that time, the school was just the original, center stuccoed part. They were just starting to put, an addition on when we were leaving, the new gym and then eventually after we left, they did an addition out the back. So it was a small building. They actually had the gymnasium, which is now a couple of classrooms in the old part of the gym.
We never even had a gas pump. You know, you had riding around all night long. You had to put gas in the car. Tony's gas station, which is now New Vernon Coach, he gave us the key. We just went in and filled up and wrote it in the book. It was just kind of the honor system. And that's how we got by. And, it all worked. Everybody said, oh, my God, how could that possibly? But it did. It worked, and it worked well. We had no road department garage. Where today is the archives are, where Mary Prendergast keeps all the history of the town. That little building there, that was the Department of Public Works. They kept all their tools, their office, everything was in there. The trucks were parked in a lean-to shed outside. And there was two men, Shorty Stoll and Jimmy Ballantyne. And they cared for all the roads and the entire. We had one dump truck. And we had a big truck that they plowed the snow with. That was it, right? And the police department, we didn't have a police department. We worked out of the firehouse. We had like a broom closet in the back of the firehouse. They had a set of double doors. There was absolutely no security involved in it. I mean, anybody that wanted to break into the place could have broke into the place. The firehouse was always unlocked because that's just the way it was. I mean, they just left it unlocked. And when I came, I was the sixth guy. We had Chief Emery, who was the original chief. He started the police department.
I remember when I first came, we had a police department, a police officer, police department of one was Harold Emery. He was our police chief. So we had a one-man police force.
Harold Emery. Harold Emery was the police patrolman, and he also did maintenance work. So when there was an emergency in town, he put down his shovel and picked up his gun and went to work as a policeman. The police headquarters at the time was in the Emery kitchen. And Mrs. Emery, Edith, would take phone calls when Mr. Emery was out patrolling Harding Township in his own car, for which he received an allowance of $6 per month. And if Mrs. Emery received a call about somebody needing help, she would flick on the light on the front porch. And as Mr. Emery patrolled by periodically, if the light was on, he knew he was needed somewhere and would come in and get the message, and off he would go. The municipal budget, I also noticed at that time, was $37,000 a year.
And of course, ever since our fire department and ambulance squad have always been volunteers. But time marches on, so now we have a much larger police force. And fortunately, we still have volunteers for our fire department. So I support all those local towns where I can.
The volunteerism for the fire department and for the emergency first aid squad has just been tremendous over the years, and it's made Harding what it is in terms of just the neighborliness and the overall citizen involvement.
I'm originally from Elizabeth, and you folks may not believe this, but when I met Mary and we got engaged and we're going to be married, you won't believe that I tried to get her to come down and live in scenic Elizabeth. And as I look back on that, I'm glad she said no. So coming to Harding Township, I can tell you, it's a beautiful place to live. It's rural, it's country, and it's got everything that one could like. You've got the trees, the grass, the scenery, the animals, including snakes. So, I mean, everything is
Lots of
really.
deer.
And lots of deer, yes. But it is a beautiful community, and the one thing that I noticed when I first started living out here, I don't think I slept very well the first couple of nights. When we had our house built on Pleasantville Road, the first couple of nights in Harding Township, the lights are out, it's dark. I couldn't sleep. I was a nervous wreck. Because in Elizabeth, you got the airplanes flying into Newark Airport. You have the buses going back and forth on the street in front of our house. All the type of noise that cities have, you don't have it out here. You don't have any noise at all at night. It is absolutely quiet. And if you ask me now, I love it. I wouldn't live anyplace else. And I thank the dear Lord that I live in this area.
When I first came here, I was born and raised in the city, in the Bronx and Manhattan. And when I applied for the job here, I actually thought I was going to Vernon Valley, the ski area. I had no idea what New Vernon was. Just a city boy. We lived in Orange and Montclair. And when I first came out here, I got off 287 onto James Street, and there was a big open field there. And I had to do a double take because there was a fox hunt going on. People on horses and the dogs chasing the fox. I don't know if the real fox was there, but it was there. And I said, this is clearly not the Bronx anymore. And this is clearly not Vernon Valley where I thought I was going to. And it was just the big wide open spaces. There were not many developments, and it was wide open. It used to be farmland out here. So it was a new world for me to get adjusted to.
And I'll never forget one day, I thought, I can't go in that teacher's room again. I'm going to go out for a ride in my car. And I did. I went out for a ride and got lost on my lunchtime. Soon came to learn that the roads don't really connect to each other, and wound up pulling into the front of the school as I heard the bell ring, which meant I was supposed to be in class. So I went flying up the stairs and just sort of, went on with the whole day. But I never went out for a long time after that. I just used to come off the way to get there and then go back the same way.
I had come from a small town small coal mining town in the Midwest, where my relatives were coal miners, and I always enjoyed going on my bicycle, and within 10 minutes I was out in the woods, in the cornfields, and the streams. And Harding really looked like that. So I had a very exciting and interesting career, and Harding really allowed that in the sense that I could come home and relax. Driving in our long drive in the summertime when it was hot outside, it was always cool in the woods, and seeing the flowers and the trees was very relaxing.
Another important element that we have here is how much the community thrives, and a thriving community really needs a constant infusion of new blood, and we have that. My parents' generation has largely moved on. The next generation is not too far behind, but we constantly have new families moving into town. It's a bit of a chicken or egg question. Are we thriving because of the refreshment of our residents, or are we attractive to newcomers because we are thriving? And I think the only answer is yes. We have both aspects of that at play for us. There's a spiritualist named David Spangler who said, people often think they live in community, but they live in proximity. And I think he's onto something there with respect to Harding. To truly be in a community, there needs to be an openness, an eagerness to engage, a caring for one another. And I think we certainly have that here, be it at the post office, in the schools, at the churches, on the athletic fields, in our neighborhoods.
You may not meet your neighbors and other people right away, but you have to go out and get involved with certain areas and what have you. But once you meet the people, these people are the friendliest people around, in my opinion. There's a lot of things that you can do, and it's not something you look in a book and you say, this is what I want to do. You got to go out and make your own fun.
Last November, I had a birthday. It happened to be my 100th birthday. At the time, there was no place to have a party as what was originally planned. Instead of that, my kids, or whoever must have been my kids, created this drive-by. So we had a parade on my street. It was absolutely an unbelievable sight. Because my daughters had told me not to go away that day. And of course, I didn't know why until it was time. Now, the parade started up at the school, and it marched down the street, and of course it went in front of my house. There was a police car, there was a fire engines, there was the ambulance, there was a World War II Jeep, then there was a bagpiper performing for music. And that was followed by, I read in the paper, it was like 30 cars that had assembled up at the school, and they wound up driving down by my house. And of course, everybody was waving. There was a group of people across the street. I thought it was Memorial Day, but it was my birthday. Of course, there was a big sign outside that said, "Happy birthday, Walter." That's me, on your 100th birthday. So that was the latest thing, something that very, very memorable. I think of that almost every day.
There is a cohesiveness and a caring and really a small town feel that makes this a special place.
As far as volunteering in the community, we've been members of the New Vernon Volunteer Fire Department. We're associated with Christ the King. My father, he built or improved the house there at the First Presbyterian Church.
My father was active in the fire department. He was a president. He was Board of Education. He was president of that. He was Environmental Commission, Shade Tree Commission, Juvenile Conference Committee, Recreation. My mother was PTA and active with the church and a founding member of Christ the King Church. They were also active in fighting the jet port for the Great Swamp. I've been active in the fire department and president of the auxiliary. I've handled and worked with my mom when I was in high school in the book section of the fire department auction. And I've done it for the last 50 years and ended up as chairman of the book section of the auction for the fire department. I worked for Harding Township School, PTO, and I was president. We were a founding family of Christ the King Church in the late 50s. I was secretary of the Juvenile Conference Committee for 20 years. I was on the Historical Society board, and Walter and I co-chaired with the Madigans and the Gockleys the bicentennial Jersey Lightning parties in 1976, and that was really fun. People volunteered their home, and all their neighbors were invited to their home for Jersey Lightning. It was the celebration of the bicentennial in Harding Township. And I was the first woman on the recreation committee. I coached softball and junior track, and then I ran the ski trips to Vernon Valley Friday nights from the school for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders for a number of years. I'm very happy to be back here. Our children grew up on Redgate Road. Some of our grandchildren did, but they still use the same property that's been in the family for 9th generation, our grandchildren.
It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Harding is known for volunteerism and philanthropy. You can be as private as you want, or you can be as involved as you want.
Also, there's the volunteerism of Harding, which helps the town in exceptionally important ways. Given my physical condition, I could not be a fireman, obviously, and so, but I've always admired the volunteer fire department here and all that they have done for the town, and the emergency first aid squad, which was basically started by Bill Dudley. Bill Dudley won a contest for design of a emergency vehicle, and Bill is an engineer by training, and he designed this emergency vehicle in response to a national contest, I believe it was, in the early 1970s, and that's what started the emergency first aid squad.
We needed an ambulance. Bill Dudley from the fire department, he decided he was going to do it. And he drew up an ambulance for this contest. And lo and behold, the guy wins the ambulance, right? The town gets the ambulance. But now the problem is, we don't have anybody to man this ambulance. We don't have anybody trained to do this. So what did this guy do? He was like an instructor, first aid instructor. He took and got a group of us together, right, and trained us all to become medics. And just about everybody in the police department was on the first aid squad. And a lot of members of the fire department, a lot of women from the fire department joined. And that's how the first aid squad got started. It was, you needed something, you went out and you did it, and you did it on your own.
We've been extraordinarily fortunate that over the years we've had remarkable town councils, remarkable volunteers who sit on our planning board and our board of adjustments, remarkable volunteers that work in our libraries, work as volunteer fire department. We just celebrated our New Vernon Fire Department, just celebrated their 100th anniversary. If it weren't for our volunteers, Harding could be very easily like every other town with high taxes. We have a K-8 school system, which we all embrace, and it's like being in a neighborhood school, because it is a neighborhood school.
They changed the school's name one year to the Harding School, just like a private school. And that's basically what Harding has been. It's been a public-private school. You get the best of both worlds here. You get teachers, some of the classes are 10, 12 kids in a classroom, which I grew up in the city and we had 35, 40 kids in a class and one teacher, no aides, that was it. So the education here was great. The kids knew each other over and over. Parents had gone to school here. So it was a great place to get started. And always had the backing of the administration, and the parents always were excited to do things, any programs, they were excited to do ideas, they were always there to back you up. In the 30 years that I taught here, it was a comfortable place to be for everybody.
I taught phys ed and health for maybe 15 or so years, and then little by little the enrollment was dropping, and really wasn't a need for 2 full-time phys ed teachers, and of course I had the seniority, so they asked me would I be willing to teach part-time in the classroom and part-time generally it was in the morning in the classroom in the afternoon. So I made my break into the classroom teaching first grade reading and math, and then the following year there was a full-time opening in second grade, and I spent about 10 years in second grade, which I absolutely loved. They had the basics of reading, and they had the drill of coming to school, and had a great classroom right off the blacktop in the elementary building, and it was a really good run. We had some fun times, and we had some special activities, and one of them that I really always enjoyed was we would go down to Bain Park in the winter and bring our ice skates. And we would walk from the school, and we'd go skating, and then we'd go back and have hot chocolate. And it was just a blast. And, we would find skates for the kids who didn't have them. And we almost had every mom would come as well, because it was such a fun afternoon. And those are really fond memories that I had of being at the school.
The story about field hockey, as I came to coach field hockey, Dee Clicker was the coach before I got here, and she decided that she didn't want to continue with coaching it anymore, and they weren't going to have a team. I don't know. I knew nothing about field hockey. I think I saw maybe when I was in college the players running by with those funky sticks. I said, all right, I'll do it. Basically opened up a book, did it for a couple years in 82 and 83, and then I went on to coaching the cross country at Chatham and came back in 91 then. And we've had over the years some really, really great athletes from this small school. As I say, the All-State banner has probably 45 kids up on the list up there for such a small school. I started many, many years ago the alumni bulletin board, and I would put up all articles about what kids had done and what they were doing in high school. And kids would go and look up on that board when they were in middle school and say, I want to get up on that board. And that would be a really good motivation for them.
And the one thing that I always felt very sad about it in Harding was that I felt like Harding Township School was such a jewel. It was such a perfect, wonderful place. And yet there were children who lived here who never even stepped foot in the school. And I understood after a while, tradition was kids went to a certain private school and that they followed in the footsteps of other family members. So that was kind of accepted after a while. But I just felt like if you just give us a chance, step inside and see what we're about. The teachers at that school, and even to this day, I still know a few of them, they just worked so tirelessly and were of such high quality in terms of their teaching and being available for the children and the parents and conferencing. And they really, really worked so hard. And I felt so proud to be a part of them and then to work beside them as the principal. They never worked for me. We worked together. That was my whole strategy. And they were true to form. They supported me, and it was very hard. We left school in June, and I was a peer, and then in September I was in their classroom observing them and having an effect. But they were all so good. It was never a challenge for me. I never really had to break anybody down, or there were always little suggestions, but never. It really was such a joy to know that I would leave the classroom and be so excited about what they were doing that it was a wonderful experience.
And this was for the 75th anniversary of the school. School, if I'm not mistaken, was 1926. They actually built the first school here. And it's still standing. It's been added to and added on. And Pete put this together with the help of a lot of people from the town, and we'll be coming up in about 5 years on the 100th anniversary of the school. One of the great things, they have the bell tower up there, the belfry. During World War II, they used to send up, I don't know what you call them, people like town people and stuff in the service. And they would go up there and they were checking to see if any German planes were coming by and stuff, and they were on alert.
And this is the armband my mother wore during Second World War when she was a lookout or whatever for the country, and she had to climb up the stairs in the tower at the Harding Township School, and they did so many hours a week, she reported, and they watched for enemy planes, which never happened. But that's the armband she wore at that time.
Harding has been under attack since the covenants were filed. We have an interstate highway going through the northern portion of Harding Township that was determined in the 1950s when the Eisenhower Highway Act went through. So we have Interstate 287 that ripped through our farmlands in the northern portion of Harding. On December 3rd, 1959, the newspapers heralded that the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey wanted to build the world's largest airport in the Great Swamp. So it has been a total and absolute fight and struggle by Harding Township residents since the very beginning, since 1922.
Great Swamp was always, back then, it was kind of a scary situation. You know, some of the maps had the runway coming right like the Mary Ann's back door there on Redgate. And her father actually donated, I think it was 14 acres of land he owned down there, to the cause. And it was a big relief when that was, beaten and was turned into what we have today, which was nice.
And the people in the town all got together and worked very diligently to erase having that jetport put in our area, the Great Swamp. So that's one of the highlights of the town.
The New York Port Authority would have ruined, and I mean ruined, this area. Harding and the surrounding areas would have been very, very different. They're going to put 20,000 long runways in the middle of the Great Swamp, fill it in, and then put the runways on top of it because they saw no ecological value in the Great Swamp. Just a swamp with a lot of water. Let's put the airport here. Perfect location. It was actually a target at one point, and the Great Swamp was right in the middle of the target is where they want to put it. So I just want to mention this because I can remember when I was about 8 being at home at dinner with my parents and having them speak about this issue and how horrific it would have been and how they had to prevent it from happening. Signatures were gathered on a petition, and of course you've heard this already from Nick Platt, but the story was really quite amazing that the citizenry, headed up by Helen Fenske, gathered in this area to defeat this from happening. And they defeated, I think it was the Department of the Interior, over a 10-year period where they basically were going to construct this thing, but the citizens said no. And every time they had a legal proceeding to debate this, the citizens came back, and as Nick has probably explained, what they wanted to do was just wear them down until they'd walk over the dead bodies. He probably has told you this. But they stood firm, and it was the beginning of the grassroots movement in this country, really. Helen Fenske, don't forget that name. She's legendary in Harding. Everyone should owe her a debt of gratitude and be, so wary of what she did, what she accomplished with the people that started in her kitchen, gathered in her kitchen with 8 or 9, and it just expanded from there. Grassroots movement was able to defeat this construction, which would have been a nightmare for this area.
We now have a 7,000-acre refuge for birds and all sorts of wildlife, 25 miles from Manhattan, that makes up a good portion, I think almost half of Harding's landmass.
I am gainfully employed and very grateful to be working at the Great Swamp Watershed Association. So I'm actually working in Harding. The Great Swamp Watershed Association is a 501c3 nonprofit organization whose primary mission is to do water quality monitoring, water quality testing in the streams and rivers that feed the Passaic River in New Jersey, from which 2.5 million people get their drinking and bathing water. So that's what the organization was founded to do 40 years ago this year. So we're celebrating our 40th year anniversary. We've since morphed into an organization that produces educational programs for students and adults. We have organized hikes that are led by some of our, outside staff, our outreach staff. We own 73 acres over here at the that we call our conservation management area at the end of Tiger Lily Lane, which is open from dawn to dusk every day, and we encourage people to visit that facility. For the students, we call it our living laboratory because it's a place where we can take students and basically inform them of all aspects of environmental science that involve the flora and fauna.
We worked with the Boy Scouts for a while, Cub Scouts for a while. I remember we were we were doing some recycling, only newspapers. So the set day was up at the school. They had a dumpster, and of course they had arranged for some of the neighbors or people that had pickup trucks that would go and pick up the newspapers that were left on your front of your house. So we picked them up and brought them up back to the school. Recycling sometimes has its own set of problems, like at that time, the vendor didn't want glossy paper. Of course, we were only collecting newsprint and newspapers. So we had to go through some of these things, and there would be like the New York Times would have a glossy section. Well, that was not recyclable with this particular vendor, so we tried to get that out. Of course, if you had too much glossy paper, it affected the price of your newspapers that you had. It was all a recycling thing. So it was like the starting of recycling before it became mandatory.
The big issue was the stoplight in Harding at the middle of town. And I was not involved in that, but I do remember the discussions in the newspaper and in public about the stoplight, whether a stoplight was needed in the middle of town, and more importantly, what color should the posts be. It was a big deal. I don't know how many people remember that, but I remember distinctly the big arguments over the color of the posts for the stoplight in the middle of Harding, if there's going to be one. And of course there is one, and it's needed now. An issue also when I was on the Township Committee and being a physicist and engineer that I got involved with a lot was sound barriers on Route 287. 287 through Harding was designed, but the grading had just started at the time my wife and I moved here, and so, because we live in that area, but the highway had been not put through in the 1960s or early 70s, and there weren't as many people there at the time. So when the highway was finally put through in the 70s, or maybe at the end of the 70s, there were no sound barriers, and yet some homes were being constructed near the highway. And so the state came and had a program where they would install sound barriers on 287 for some of the homes, particularly behind the Harding Green Condominium Association on 202. The ordinary citizen really doesn't understand sound transmission very well, and from cars or anything, and whether sound barriers are very effective or not. They're not very effective for low frequencies. They're very effective for the high frequency whine of tires, for example. So the kind of barriers that one has depends upon what kind of noise. And a lot of residents felt that a sound barrier would eliminate all possible noise. So we had a lot of education in Harding with citizens and residents on sound barriers, and I brought in some sound experts to give testimony and to give ideas on how the height of a barrier should be. And of course it all had to be it all had to be associated with the state, and they had to be involved too. So it was a major issue for quite a lengthy time, trying to get everybody on board with regard to sound barriers and what kind of sound barriers one might have. And towards the end of the 1990s, a group of library volunteers appeared at the township committee meeting one night with a design for a library that they would like to build on the township property where the town hall is. To summarize, the township committee worked with this group of people to finally design the library as it exists now. There was a fair amount of discussion about where a building should be placed, whether it would be on the town property as it is now. Should it replace the Tunis Ilex house, or could it be on the Tunis Ilex house property? That was all discussed in great detail with the Township Committee, and particularly John Murray and myself with the group of library folks. But finally it was determined to design the building similar to a building similar to the town hall that had been donated by the Kirby family on where the location is now, and it's become a very popular community center as well as library for Harding Township.
My parents always encouraged me never to go into the dog business because, you know, it was a 24/7 business and it was hard to get vacations, and, you know, and they were kind of against me pursuing anything like that. So they wanted me to go out and be a, you know, captain of industry, and I tried that for 14 years and hated it, and so then I quit my job one day and decided I was going in the dog business. So we ended up, I took over my dad's small business he started after Mrs. Frillinghuysen passed away, and we developed the Morris Animal Inn, which now is on Sand Spring Road, and so I've been doing that for like 43 years now. And my wife worked alongside me and is a big part of our success. Over the years, although we did move away for 7 years, I worked for Del Monte Corporation, and we lived in a number of places throughout the United States. And we always felt we wanted to move back home, which we did. And so it's changed a lot from when I was a kid, but it's still a great place, and it's been done very well. So we feel, I think, as our children and grandchildren feel, it's a great place to live, and that's why we came back.
Harding Township, without a doubt, is probably unique in itself. It is a place where to raise a family is excellent, and what have you. So I wouldn't change anything.
What I loved so much about Harding was it was just such a place. You felt like they were part of your family. I mean, my family was very local. Everybody's still in New Jersey, so I certainly had that, and I had a big church family. But it just, for me, Harding was the kids in my class and the activities in the town. I just felt so deeply rooted in a place that, you know, I had shown up and known absolutely nothing about. You know, I would be invited to Holy Communions and parties that the children were having, and I tried to be fair about it. If, you know, several invitations came and I couldn't do them all, then I couldn't do any, because I didn't want to, you know, play any favorites. But, you know, many graduation parties, and the biggest gift now is Facebook, because a lot of the old students that I had are on Facebook, and it is so wonderful to be able to see, you know, them and their families and what they're doing, and it's just absolutely amazing to really keep in touch in that distant way, but at least to know what, you know, what's going on.
There's a banner up in the gym that Matt Spelker, who's the present superintendent, when I retired a few years ago, did up a banner, and it said, "Congratulations, Coach Keating, for 41 years of coaching," because I started coaching that many years ago. And it said, "Play hard, play tough, play smart." And that was the moniker that I always used, HTS, play hard, play tough, play smart. And hopefully they learn that in life to, not just on the field of play, but other places, to go out there and play hard, play tough, and play smart. And hopefully that's our legacy that we've been able to give to the kids and the students that we've had over the years.
My wife and I and our children, when they lived here, have had a really marvelous life in Harding Township for more than half of the 100 years of Harding. The town is a great place. The volunteerism is incredible. The citizens' interest in the town and its well-being and its welfare and its environment and its security is just is something to be admired for sure. My wife and I have been very privileged and very blessed to live in Harding and to be able to participate in the town and in the activities of Harding. And I'm glad to be here for the 100th anniversary.
It's almost unbelievable that over the last 100 years, we have had so many volunteers, from the beginning of the New Vernon Fire Department to the First Aid Squad, to those people who sit on the Environmental Commission, to those people who sit on the Shade Tree Commission. Every one of them came to Harding Township for their own particular reason. Some of us were born here. Some of us came here as young children by our parents moving for a new job, or some of us as young adults decided to raise our family here. But all of us have volunteered in some way. And that is why we're celebrating a 100th year anniversary for Harding Township, and why people still get out of the car visiting here for the very first time, wondering where they are and how did this ever happen.
We should thank the people that lived in Harding, you know, the older generation, for looking out and keeping Harding what it is today. And hopefully, in the future, it won't change.